I think Gong did this really well in its initial days, even when Gong launched, even before much before I joined, it was really focused on getting its first play right, right? And I think uh, really going deep into the US market, really making the at that point what we call conversation intelligence take as both a category but also really a product. And I think
All right, everybody, welcome to this episode of the RevAmp podcast. I am very, very excited by today's guest, a very special guest, Shantanu from Gong, who I had the opportunity to meet in person a few weeks back. So we're going to talk all about kind of the amazing growth of Gong and some of the challenges from an operational perspective that Shantanu has gotten to deal with. Before we dive into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, where you come from, how you got to where you're at today?
well, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and good to meet you in person only a few weeks ago. Just I think I'd say I'd probably talk about my own time at Gong, but even before that, I'll probably go a few years back where in a past life I was a management consultant first. So that's where I pretty much started my professional journey as a management consultant at Bain and Company. Worked with a lot of big enterprise companies, helping them figure out their growth strategy. I feel like I learned a lot in those years, just thinking about problem solving, how to communicate, how to work with teams, and drive results. Phase two for my professional life was more just working in big tech. Spent 5 years in LinkedIn. And back then, we didn't even have revenue operations as the name of the function. I think there were different functions coming together, but I got a chance to work across different pieces there. Great learning just on how big tech has tried to solve the problem of matching and mapping how customers get value while also driving a lot of clear processes and systems around how a go-to-market engine should run. So very good for me there, just in terms of learning all of that. And then about this is about 5 years ago or 4 years ago now, when I figured I actually need to go in and learn a little bit more about how to help a little bit smaller organizations work. And that's when I moved into a small company called Nitro, which is about $50 million ARR, help them drive their revenue operations, and was there for about a year when Gong actually launched their EMEA office in Dublin. And I had been a customer to Gong twice. So it was almost a very, very strong, compelling pull to join them. And I've been here now for the last 2.5 years, and I help drive go-to-market operations for Gong across our international markets.
Yeah. And, I think probably everyone that's listening and watching to this episode has heard of Gong. It's probably, at least if not a customer, has interacted with Gong's product. But that wasn't the case not so many years ago, right? Gong has seen, it's one of the kind of really big success stories, I think, that came out of the SaaS world, and I think it really got in front of everyone when a few years ago, I don't remember how many now, Gong had a commercial on the Super Bowl, which I think for a startup that was seen as like,
Yes.
whoa, right? But, Gong went from kind of a single product, mostly on the US market, to the multinational, multi-product, very large company it is today. And so you've kind of seen that. So I'd love to kind of understand from your perspective, when you joined, what were the kind of the things that were happening in that growth process? And, how did you kind of experience that? And what were some of the challenges that you kind of dealt with there?
I think there's a lot of great stuff to unpack in what you just said, Mark. I think number one, I think Gong was very, very clear about the choices they make. If you There's this book on play to win, which I really like, and talks about the framework of finding options of where to play, how to win, and eventually a roadmap and executing it. And if I think about that, literally to me, what that translates into is ensuring you have the right amount of focus. I think Gong did this really well in its initial days, even when Gong launched, even much before I joined, it was really focused on getting its first play right, right? And I think uh, really going deep into the US market, really making at that point, what we call conversation intelligence take as both a category, but also really a product. And I think once that happened, um, there were three parts that Gong saw. And if I think about those three parts, one obviously was going from being predominantly US driven to an international company. Second, you mentioned going from single product to multi-product. I think it's also very interesting space if you're dealing with revenue tech stack in general, because there's so many different players who are moving across that value chain. And I think going from where we are to now, we've added forecast to the product and so on. And the third piece, if I think there's international in this product, but the third real big push as well was how do you start thinking about your customer set, which segments are they in, what size they are, and just going a little bit broader in that. So all three have had their own shares of learnings and challenges, but Gong did it right by focusing first at the smaller subset and then going big. So let's pick international first. Let's say this as an example, right? And I think um, a lot of companies have tried this and succeeded in different ways. Uh, I think what Gong did really well was being very clear about, again, being focused on which are the markets you're going to go into first. Um, and we identified, okay, within, let's say, Europe and APAC, there are a few English-speaking markets. Let's start there first because you can translate your product a lot closer. The way you sell is similar. The marketing required, you have to translate. And again, you're a marketer yourself. You've probably seen how you translate copy from market A to market B, so long as it's standardized to a little extent. You if it's an English speaking market, it's relatively cleaner. And then how do you think about UI? We've invested a lot in product. So we started building all those pieces and then creating those waves. And our first focus was UK. Now we're slowly starting on moving on in other languages and so on as well. And I think the key there has been a very clear goal, but also a very strong cross-functional effort to bring all of this together. And at the heart of it is people, right? If I think about anyone going big internationally, people is key on how you do this, right? Because you need to hire a team, so you're transporting the culture you've already got at HQ into a new location.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. So, scaling a team is no easy feat. We recently published an interview with you at Gong as a
Right.
Deal Hub customer, and one of I think you mentioned something about a very large multiple increase in the sales team as as part of that. So what were some of the key challenges you faced with that, and if from an operations perspective, from just the company-wide perspective, and what were some of the things that you did to address those challenges?
Great. So I think as we scale, I think there were two big things which happened. Right? I mean, when the moment you scale, and again, you're right, we've grown a lot where even our European setup, we just launched EMEA in 2022. It's been about 2021 rather. I'm blanking on the year. It's been about 3 years since we did. The first big challenge is making sure the right quality of people. But then second, you want to ensure both your processes and systems are scaling to actually be able to drive to the same piece. In fact, I don't know if you read this book called the Culture Code, and it talks a lot about how to get results, you have to get a culture where people feel that they're all contributing together, working together. It's actually fun. So how do you scale that as well as getting drive results? So on the first one, just in getting the people right, we made a very concerted decision about how to start hiring, how to start scaling. There's a lot of research done about ideally your first international head that you hire outside HQ. Once you're moving, it could be from US to outside, or it could be from a different country to another. You hire somebody who's probably more of a general manager who can do a little bit of sales, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of operation, a little bit of hopefully understands the product to a bit. Again, I'm probably describing unicorn here, but Gong did really well in hiring that person, and that person was my boss at that point, Wendy Harris, and she really helped build and scale that culture up front. At the same time, the second side, I think if I mentioned the processes and systems, it's crucial to get that right because everything the way we'd been set up, and I can obviously go deep into the examples of how we coded, or also, but if I even take that one level further, the way we set up territories, we'd been all of our CRM, everything had been set up to focus on the American market. We now start creating pieces for let's go and sell into the UK. Let's start selling into Australia eventually, and so on. So as we did that, we had to start looking at whatever worked in the US, would it work? So there's certain maybe pieces which translate very easily, but then there are things around what's the territory size? What's the actual dollar quota per person? If we start, I mentioned quotes, if you have a process or SLA on how the deal desk operates on a code going through from the time a customer hopefully is going to be signing and you work backwards from the end of quarter, well, we had to figure out how to really get admin permissions here where typically you would not have the same lag if you were in the US. So there's so many small pieces you had to figure out. And to do that, one very simple and tactical thing we did was we almost created a tiger team. And I know there are people who don't love that phrase, but I feel that was so helpful. And the tiger team had representation from finance, from operations, from somebody who represented sales as well. And when we got all of that together, we were able to very clearly identify, I, I wouldn't want to call it a blueprint, but a really clean workflow on what happens, when does it happen, and who needs to change what from an EMEA lens. And just creating that almost recurring views on what's working, what's not really help scale that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I think I personally think the quote unquote tiger team concept is super effective, right? I mean, that's kind of where the concept of deal desk came from, right? So it's like you get a
Yes.
bunch of people from a cross-functional group of people. It,
Hmm.
streamlines, you make there's no broken telephone. So it sounds like you did that. There was an established playbook blueprint for the
Hmm.
US side, and you brought together a few stakeholders across the ocean to say, okay, this is the blueprint that worked there. What are the inputs that we need to look at on this side and what tweaks do we need to make to
Hmm.
kind of make it work here? So was that like an acute phase, or is that an ongoing project that continuously meets and works on those things?
That's a good point. So I think there was a, let's say, higher concentrated upfront effort, but then there's an ongoing, we almost have a monthly cadence of that still going on because, and again, those topics could vary, right? I'll give you an example again. Let's stay in that. I talked about the discount process or even the quoting process as an example. Um, when we set it up initially, some of the big challenges we had were the rules or guidelines based on which, let's say, our deal desk, our finance team, eventually our CFO approves certain things. You're looking at things like billing terms, contracting terms. What are the pieces just standardized? And if there are deviations, what's allowed, what's not? And especially in the last 2 years in the world where we've been, um, you talk to a company about a 30-day time lag between the sign and actual cash being paid out, that makes a big difference, right? Or if you're talking about someone who has a half yearly payout versus an annual payout, those kind of changes, and what's in line with what we would say is company policy versus not. So just defining all of that, and then at that initial upfront piece, we're like, okay, so what level of approvals do we parse out to the regions or to the, like in this case in our office here, versus what needs to still be controlled centrally, and what's the impact to try and run that through. But then the recurring pieces which come in is, let's say, maybe 6 months after we started selling, we're thinking, okay, now we're selling within Europe. We'll soon have to sell not just in dollars, but there are customers who want to buy in pounds. There potentially customers who want to buy in euros. How do we think about that? And if we do currency conversion, what does that mean in terms of the rates that we're using? How does it go back and flow back into, again, I'm bringing the connections between the ops team and finance and deal desk, is how does it go back to what finance might have on their budget? And then how does that translate with the way the pricing team is thinking about pricing and discounting? So, and the third thing which makes it even more complex is there's a culture around it. The cultural aspect is as you go to different markets. And again, I'm just giving a very generic example, but you could have certain markets in Europe which are going to always be more price conscious versus say someone in the US or even UK. So how do you adapt your pricing accordingly? Those are all topics which some of those could be more structure and we identify those pieces up front. But there's some stuff which we start learning as you start going to market, as you start having your first AEs go and sell. And then I've not even gone to the post-sales side, which might have its own challenges.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get there, but maybe going down a few levels deeper, some of those challenges of international expansion, and as it relates to, let's say, the home office that's in the US and used to a very certain thing. When you talk about the structure of a deal, the legal terms, right? You have very different kind of legal landscape in Europe when it comes to software and things of that nature. And maybe, I'm not super fluent on the individual idiosyncrasies of the different territories within the EU or the UK. But I would imagine that there needs to be, kind of unique terms and structures of agreements as it relates to those customers. How did that fit into kind of the broader go-to-market across the company, and what was that like, kind of figuring that out?
It's a very good point, because if I think about the legal guardrails for each country, and I think you hit the spot, nail on the head. The challenge with legal guardrails and the way each country operates, it is just so unique. And I think Europe obviously has been at the forefront of GDPR and privacy laws and so on and so forth. We actually ended up doing two things. There's almost like, one is, how do you define what's going to happen? And second, how do you enable the team to sell there? So essentially what I mean by defining is, you again pick and choose what are your top priority markets. And we actually create documentation around it. So making sure that if the legal rules within, let's say, pick a Germany, for example, needs you to be compliant on A, B, C, D. Is that the same as what's happening in the US? What's different? How are we set up against that? And trying to make sure both our legal teams are set up. How do we work with, again, our marketing team to ensure we have the right information on our website? So if somebody from, let's say, Germany logs in, are they able to see that? Second, you then start enabling the team. And I think it's crucial to ensure that the team starts understanding how to speak that language. Because in the end, we're also probably selling to customers who will have teams in those in the same markets. And our product is so unique because you're actually then getting access to some very confidential and sensitive, potentially, data. So I would say that was a very strong focus. And I think any company looking to move from the US to Europe, essentially, but even most international markets, there's a lot of time probably spent with the legal team. And I think we were spending almost an hour a week just trying to figure that out.
Yeah. And that was definitely where I was thinking, because fast forward a little bit, Gong went from this single product company, which was, their call intelligence, now it's expanded to kind of a suite of products. And again, like you said, inherently the product handles some data, things like that, is very much more scrutinized, let's say, in the European market and elsewhere. So how has the introduction of those products been as you scaled? What were some of the inputs and challenges around being kind of the international node during that launch? And then from just kind of supporting the go-to-market, what was that like?
Absolutely. I think the move from single product to multi-product is probably one of the biggest litmus tests that any company goes through.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially creating a second company within that company. And I think that's something I've seen in a couple of places before as well. But if I could pull it back to Gong, when we launched, we were playing in this, I'll just draw out a value chain or the customer life cycle. Let's say we're talking about players who are in the initial prospecting space, to where, let's say, in the middle, I'm calling it qualifying and close, where Gong was essentially on the initial conversation intelligence product. And then I'd almost say there's this entire piece around post sales on the right. And then at the bottom of all of that is, how do you report, how do you forecast, how do you work through that? This entire value chain has, and I'm not even gone to marketing tech stack, because I know you're very, very familiar with it. But if I think about in this bucket, there's thousands of systems. And the challenge that we've seen is a lot of these systems have been converging, and a lot of customers don't even know how system A or product A is different from product B. So that's the market where and if I go back to 2.5, 3 years ago, when we started moving across that landscape, we were stepping into. So I think the three biggest challenges that we had to keep in mind while doing, I think the number one piece, very, very operational piece I'm coming to, is how do you ensure that we have a SKU which is set up, and you're able to figure out all the different elements and pieces that come with it, because your pricing model might be different. And I'll just give you a very, very detailed example there. The way we priced our core product, versus the way we priced our, let's say, forecast product. Thankfully, in our case, they were both SaaS products. There are companies who've tried it as one being SaaS, the other being consumption-based, can be challenging. So just making that decision clear. When that pricing comes in, do you start having bundles? How do you price that? So those are all very specific, few-related questions. And then for us, trying to make sure that we can time how we build a SKU on Salesforce, how do we connect that with everything on the CP in the Deal Hub in this case, and being able to then enable the team on how to use that was, let's say, that was the first thing. The second big challenge, and this is more from just a product functionality perspective as well, is how do you ensure that when you're bringing two products together, you still want to maintain the same brand salience, which is part of the same product or the same company. And that I believe Gong has done really well, but there are companies where you might bolt on a separate product and there's no connectivity between the two. In our case, one integrated workflow. So you're then seeing the benefits of that from a consolidated workflow perspective. And the third big piece, which I think is a question which is even more pronounced in today's world, is how do you ensure that you're investing enough for growth in the new product while ensuring that you're continuing to feed your core? And that is a very simple, it could be a simple budgeting problem, but it's also a very strong resourcing problem. What percentage of time for everybody in the team is going to be in keeping the lights on for the core product versus adding to it, or how much? So those are all things which are fun to answer from here. But I would say there are a lot of, those are just three high level pieces. There's so much behind that. It's a lot of time getting all of that right.
Yeah. I go back to, the way you described kind of bringing on a new product after having a core product. I know you and I are both dads. It's like the first thing that comes out, right?
Yes.
You have your first kid, and you kind of bring
Yes.
them up, and then you bring home a new baby, and you want to make sure that you don't, you still give full attention to your firstborn, but you have a baby that needs help growing. And so, there's a lot of challenges with that. And, we just had Father's Day here in the US, so I guess that's fresh on my mind.
Happy Father's Day.
You as well. So, I think somewhat of a kind of shifting the focus a bit here, but, in order for Gong to have done what it's done and done it so well, there needs to have been a certain level of flexibility and agility, right? There's been a lot of headwinds over the last few years that we've all seen. And especially with rapid growth, there's often the need for kind of being quick and efficient in implementing changes or processes. So how important is being agile in, your kind of core focus and team that you work with, and what part does it play in your strategy?
Great. So I think being agile is super important, and I think again I'll bring a RevOps lens. I think there's really two core things. One is making sure from a process side you're set up, and second is from a system side. I'll go deeper into each. So from a process side, just having a very clear roadmap I think was very helpful. Again, we have a fantastic team in the RevOps team globally, and we've almost had a program management function set aside where as we were launching multi-product, as we were doing different things, we actually had somebody whose core focus was, okay, let's get this right. Let's align all the different functions need to work on it. Let's figure out what the problem is. If there's someone who's working on, let's say the CPQ change, somebody's working on enabling the team, there's somebody who's working with marketing on pricing. How do you bring all of those pieces together? How do you work with the new product team within product? So that I think just building sounds very, very simplistic, but building those work plans, those timelines, those tasks and subtasks, I think that helped keep us in check and in line and ensure that we were going towards a certain end date. And that was super helpful. And how do you communicate all that? And the second piece from a systems perspective, again, to be agile and nimble, you have to be one, almost ruthless in terms of what systems you have, but also what systems you don't need. Because again, I love the analogy you got of if you have two kids, how do you ensure that you're finding enough time and resources for both? It's exactly the same. If you have to have X number of systems, are they actually adding value, or are you taking away value from you? And in terms of being nimble and agile, and again, it was great that we have obviously Deal Hub as our CPQ. We have a few specific pieces we've picked and work around that with Gong and let's say at the core of our tech stack. So having that level of confidence in how we are set up is ensuring both our nimbleness and agility as a team, but the unintended consequence of having a very, I would say, reliable and working tech stack is this ensures we get less noise from our sales teams. And then the more efficient and effective the sales teams are, the less time you're spending in fixing pieces. And that gives us more time back. So that's helped us be agile in a certain way as well. And again, I think our enablement team is really world class, and that's helped us really drive all of that together.
Awesome. So in the last kind of 5 minutes we have here, we talked a lot about Gong and its kind of growth up until today. What do you think are some of the lessons learned through this journey, and what's the next thing?
So I think I almost think of most, and you can see I think of frameworky in 3 points quite often, but to me there's people, there's strategy, there's process, and finally results. And I think if I think about that very simple thing on the learnings we've had on the people side, that's to me always talent is my number one operating priority if I think about it from of my own the way I approach it. But I think Gong has done it really well, where we've ensured we've hired the right people, especially as we've gone scaled from one product to multiple, gone international, gone across segments. I think that's one very important learning to have, I think. Second, from a strategy and customer perspective, we've always been very, probably seen this as well as our customers, but I think we are very, very customer first in the way we think about things, and being able to really spend time with, like, in the last year, I've spoken to about 150 plus customers myself, just trying to understand and learn how they have been doing it. It helps they're in similar persona as me. But getting a chance to help that customer feedback feed into your strategy and being very, very focused on a few things done right, I think has been huge. From a process standpoint, just having a very clear roadmap of what's coming, and then the results have been pretty much an outcome of those three pieces. So if I think of what's coming next, I always think about how Gong has been doing AI before AI became cool. And it's interesting that we talk about so many different new AI players coming in, but that is a very complex problem to solve in most cases. And we've, through our core product, and we've pretty much been, let's say, the first real sales AI player. So I'm very excited about a few things which we're working on in continuing that piece forward, and the way we can help drive more efficiency as well as effectiveness for every seller out there. So that's something I'm really looking forward to.
Awesome. Well, Shantanu, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Is there anywhere the folks at home can maybe learn a little bit more about you, follow you on socials, learn a little bit more about Gong, somewhere they can go?
Thanks, Mark. I think the best place, Mark, is LinkedIn for me. I'm again, as an ex-LinkedIn employee, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and very happy to connect and help share what I can. Even about Gong, I think we have a good team from marketing who's focused on LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn is a good place to connect on both.
Yeah. Shantanu, thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much for it.
Bye-bye.